Tov, everybody. For any newcomers, I'm Rabbi Jeff Dreyfus. It's wonderful to have back at Temple Israel in the building for the very first time in 13 years, I believe. How many years? 2008. 15 years. A very, very special guest. This is a very special homecoming for Meir, who served as our shaliach, as an emissary from the state of Israel to this community, to Temple Israel. And it's a very special night for me because right after Meir finished his shlichut, his service to Temple and to Memphis, he served all of the South's Jews at Henry S. Jacobs Camp, and he was my co-counselor all summer. And it was the beginning of a very special and fruitful friendship. And Tomer, it's very special to me that you came home to share your wisdom, your experience, your perspective with all of us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
I would like to share a little bit about your formal bio before I hand it over to you. Tomer served in the IDF as a search and rescue officer. He was also a commander in the Israeli Officers School, commanding a 30-soldier search and rescue unit and training over 80 cadets to become officers in various corps in the IDF. Of course, you know he was a shaliach here in Memphis. And Tomer went on to earn an MBA at Wharton at the University of Pennsylvania and has been working for a number of companies who we use every day, Amazon, Apple, some health startups, and is now in the process of, well, he'll tell you more about that maybe in a minute, but working on forming his own company. So Tomer Meir, welcome from all the way to Cholon to New York to back to Memphis. Welcome home.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. This is, out of all the talks, I think this is probably the one that I'm most excited about. Being at Temple, you know, seeing some familiar faces is like feeling like coming back home. And I want to thank Rabbi Micah and Rabbi Jeff for having me here. It really does feel like going back to this amazing community, you know, after so many years. So thank you. Today we're gonna talk a little bit about a very fun and light topic, you know, that you might have heard of. Nothing too crazy, but the Israel-Hamas war. And before, you know, without further ado, I want to start diving deep. So today, in terms of the structure, we have a few things that we've prepared for you. The goal for today is really to go and get a better understanding of what's going on, learn more about the facts, and get a better understanding of the complexity of what's happening in Israel. In the day and age of you know, information that's being spread and available for everyone, and in a time where some people know more than others, we're going to try to focus today on a few things that relate to sort of history, current, and some of the future things as well. So first, we're going to talk a little bit more of a recap and summary about what's happening in Israel and the reaction in Israel and in America post-October 7th. We're then going to talk a little bit about some of the false narratives that we hear and talk about them and better understand them. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what the Israelis feel, you know, in terms of their core and their values, how their reaction to what has happened, and some of their thoughts for the future. And we're going to end it with a Q&A session where we've prepared some tough questions for you in advance, but also feel free to ask whatever you want. It's important to note, this is what we say is a safe space. It's an opportunity for everyone to ask whatever question they want. There is nothing that's called dumb question. Everyone can ask whatever they want, and every question is valid. So without further ado, let's start a little bit about myself, as Jeff already started, just with a few pictures. I was born and raised in Cholon, in the Tel Aviv area. And over my military service, this is me at the age of 18, serving, started in the artillery forces. I've served a lot on the West Bank, so I was able to engage with Palestinians. I stood in checkpoints. I went on patrols. I really was embedded and got a better understanding of the Palestinian population while I was there. I served most of my time in Hebron, in other areas of the West Bank. But I think this was a monumental phase to me where I understood a little bit more about the conflict, but from a personal perspective. Another photo of me. And then basically after the period of the boot camp of my first period is when I became a search and rescue officer. My unit basically operates worldwide. We're the one that's helping to search and rescue people from debris. So when there is an earthquake or when there is a bombing of a certain building, our team will go there. The unit operates worldwide. So in helping other nations within their efforts of search and rescue. So the team has operated in Haiti. We actually got to Haiti after the earthquake faster than the American Army. We operate in Mexico City. We operate in Africa in multiple places, in Turkey. Almost any major national event or earthquake that you can hear, the unit has been there to some extent. For those who can hear, for those who can see, it might be a little bit blurry. You might be able to recognize me here. This is an event that happened in Israel where a train hit a freight track and fell off the train tracks. About three or four people died, and about 80 people were injured. If you can see me, I am a little bit here. It's hard to see, but a very confused and exhausted officer. So that's me. My second role in the military was a commander at officer training school, so it's sort of the equivalent of West Point in the IDF. In here, I'm the one with the orange beret giving away sort of the pins at the end of the officer course to the cadets. After that, I came in and I became the Israel Shaliach here in Memphis. Some of you might be able to recognize some of these folks. They're way, this has been 15 years ago, so you can try to imagine them as they were young. I had an amazing time, and really a few of my formative years were here. I also brought in an Israeli and Palestinian exhibition of Israeli and Palestinian kids to the National Civil Rights Museum, thanks to Rabbi Micah that helped with that. So really been in the community a lot. I also hosted an Israeli Business Development Forum here in Memphis at the Peabody Hotel with a few very important people, aside Mike Sherman that's here. There are two people. In the middle sits Reda Mansour, who was back then the Israel consul of Atlanta. Since then, he became the ambassador to Panama and also to Brazil. And there is a very special person that sits right next to me. Who knows who this guy is? Let's see if we have any people here that can recognize him. No. I will give you his name. Maybe we'll see if you will know. His name is what? Yes. So his name is Ron Dermer. Does that ring a bell? So Ron was the Minister of Economic Affairs back on the embassy in Washington. He then became the ambassador to the U.S. from Israel, and now he's one of the most senior ministers with Benjamin Netanyahu that's also running this war. So Ron is a very special person. Also a Wharton grad, which back in the day was very interesting because I didn't even think about school. As Jeff mentioned, after going to Jacob's camp, I ran into a very special guy. That's where we were co-counselors together. As you can see, two young people at Jacob's camp at 2008. And I actually want to take this opportunity because when I met Jeff, I met a 19-year-old, a little bit goofy, a little bit immature guy. And I can't say that I can't express as much appreciation and how proud I am at Jeff for becoming who he is today. It's been an honor to have you as a friend, and this is a lifelong friendship. So thank you, Jeff, and I'm excited to be here because of you. So that's us in 2008 as two young people. And after that, I came back, as Jeff said, to Wharton and then worked in a few big tech companies and some healthcare startups. Now thinking about building something on my own, but we can talk about it in a different time. And after that, sort of a little bit background, let's talk about October 7th. I know that most of you know what happened in some way or another, but I want to share a little bit about that part, about how people got introduced and better understand sort of what has happened out of all this chaos. So what you can see here is text messages with my family in Israel. I'm based in New York. Remember, that's why you could see here that this actually says October 6th, because in New York it was October 6th. In Israel it was 6:30 a.m. For those of you who can read Hebrew or cannot, Basically, I will walk you through a little bit about some of our text messages. Aside from the fact that I'm a bad texter, as you can see here, in general, our conversation was mostly involved about asking and understanding if people went to the safe room. So my sister Karen is asking, Mom and Dad, did you go to the safe room? In Israel, in terms of safe rooms, or there are shelters within the neighborhood, or in the basement of a building, or in the newer buildings, you have one of the rooms within each apartment. So my sister is asking if my mom and dad went to the safe room. She says there is a large barrage of rockets coming into the center of Israel. My mom said, we are in the safe room. Where are the missiles coming from? She said she doesn't know, etc., etc. My mom asking again, Tomer, where are the missiles are coming from? From the north or from the south? There's such an uncertainty about what is happening, where the missiles are coming from, a lot of uncertainty that was in this moment. And I don't need to tell you enough, but just, in that moment, it was a very tough moment for the Israelis. We were surprised. No one knew what's going on. It was a very tough period. We didn't know about this attack, despite, in hindsight, a lot of failure from the intelligence part and also from the IDF. But the challenge there that we were surprised. We have terrorists coming over from the air, from the sea, from paragliders that came in, and really the atrocities that most of you heard of. I don't need to repeat, but this was a very tough moment for the Israeli community, as you've heard. The result is about more than 10,000 rockets that were firing from Gaza, about 1,200 people who were murdered, and about 240 people that were kidnapped. With the recent deals, that number have been going down significantly to about 155, as I read this morning, about 159. But we'll talk more about this in a second, and about 200,000 people that were displaced from their homes. Just for you to understand, this is the Gaza Strip, and what you could see here in the blue area is how far these terrorists arrive. They were able to go very lengthy distance, much more than they thought they would be able to go, to their surprise, but they were able to accomplish a lot in a very short amount of time. To summarize this a little bit, this was a huge surprise for us, probably the biggest attack since the Yom Kippur War. I think the biggest aspect here is that it really hit home for every Israeli family to some extent or the other. Not only the ones that their family members were kidnapped or those that were in the south, but also for people that live in the center and are going to shelter almost any other day because of the missiles. But also what I say, like some sort of national trauma and tragedy. And this is a mental health crisis. It's going to take some time to take care of. One of the areas that came out of this is the unity of our society, which I'm going to talk about in a second. But one of the areas that the terrorists came in, they didn't differentiate between Muslims, Jews, or Christians. They didn't ask anyone about their religion or their background. They took back to Gaza people from the Jews, Christians, Muslims. They took people from Nepal, from Thailand. They really didn't care about where they're from, where the people are from, and what's their background. So this is just to tell you in terms of what happened. Now let's talk a little bit about the goals of the war. So the Iron Swords operation, there are two major goals that I think there is a huge consensus around Israeli society about what needs to be accomplished. Is bring back everyone home, all the hostages, and then eradicate Hamas. Some of these the two goals go together, but also contradict one another, and we're going to talk about this in a second. A little bit more about the society in Israel. So, for those who follow, the pre-October 7th, the society in Israel was very divided. I would say probably the most divided that I remember in my lifetime. There were a lot of things that contribute to that, but the vast majority, the biggest thing was the judicial reform that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has tried to accomplish, and that really teared up sort of the liberal Israelis with right-wing people, and really caused a lot of chaos within the Israeli society. I did not remember any time of my life where the Israeli society has been more divided. And I think the sort of the glass half full from what has happened is really what this October 7th led us. And I decided to put here a few photos that really tells the story. From the Arab side and from the Muslim side, these two people are Muslim Israelis that went in with their vehicle to where all the atrocities happened and rescue Jews on that day. They went multiple times. They just rescue a lot of people. I think one of the things that Hamas imagined that will happen is that the Arab in Israel will also also become and do a lot of riots in Israel. There was going to be an uprising. But to our surprise, the Arab Muslims and Christians actually stood by Israel and actually are helping out with everything that's happening. On the right hand, on the top right, you could see people holding and packing up things for the people who were evacuated from their home. On the bottom left, you see, I'm not sure if you can really see, but a lot of these soldiers, what are they wearing, if you can see? They're wearing yarmulkes. Why is that so special? Because all these people are Haredic people, Orthodox Jews that decided to volunteer to the military as an effort to support the war, even if it means for a few weeks. But that's something that has never happened before in that scale. And the last one is the reservist, and we had more than 100% of the people that were called actually came in. So it's really brought us together in a way that I don't remember. After the reaction in Israel, on the flip side, we have the reaction in America. We're talking about false narratives that are being spread. We're just going to talk about. We have alternative facts that are being discussed. We have Israel is becoming equivalent of colonialism, the rise of anti-Semitism on campuses and around, the free from the river to the sea. Palestine will be free, which basically means to wipe out Israel. Because the river is the Jordan River and the sea is the Mediterranean. So a very much significant uprising within America, and I think that's why this talk and others is so important. So let's talk about these false narratives. Let's talk about these false narratives and talk about them one by one. Narrative number one, Israel wants to occupy Gaza. Who in here have heard this phrase before? Raise your hand if you have. Okay. Is it true? Is it not true? And if it's not true, why is it not true? Yeah.
It's not true because Israel gave Gaza back.
We gave Gaza back. Okay. That's a good point. What else? Any thoughts? We don't want to pay for it. That's also a huge burden. But in general, let's talk and get some history and relate to also what Sally said. So this is Gaza before 2005. A little bit of a background, very short history context here. In the 1990s, there was something that's called the Oslo Agreements. Oslo Agreements divided the Palestinian territories into A, B, and C. To make things simple, A territories is completely controlled by the Palestinian Authority, both the military side and both the administrative side. The B territories are controlled, the administrative side by the Palestinian side and the security side by Israel. And C is fully controlled by Israel. Before 2005, the Gaza Strip looked like this. What you see here in the dark colors is basically all the areas of A areas, meaning full control by the Palestinians. Full control, both security and both administrative. What you can see here on the light color, these are Israeli territories, so area C. In 2005, I was in the military back then, and Israel decided, led by Ariel Sharon, decided to withdraw from Gaza completely. Basically, take everything, evacuate people, Jews, Israeli soldiers evacuating Jews from their homes, take them out without receiving anything in return. So essentially, from 2005, the entire Gaza Strip is in Area A, meaning fully controlled by Palestinians, both on the security side and both on the administrative side. And just for you to show you what happened in 2005 and the disengagement is you can see Israeli soldiers going in, taking people out of their homes. This was, if we said just before October 7th, the Israeli society was very much divided. This was the second most divided nation we've ever had in my lifetime. As you can see here, we practice. I was not there physically, but we have practiced about how to take people away from their home and walk them through. So we have done all of that. So a lot of this work can be done to basically take people out of Gaza. So the thought that we have about Israel wants to occupy Gaza, we would have done this long time ago if we would want. Let's go to the second narrative. Israel is committing war crimes in Gaza. Who have heard about that? Raise your hand. Okay, what do you say to that? Is it true? Is it not true? If not, why? It's a little bit more complex. Yes. Anything? Any thoughts?
They are killing innocent people, children and babies.
Yeah. So, okay. So,
I believe that's a war crime. I'm not sure.
okay. In general, yes. Civilians, innocent civilians are unfortunately being killed in Gaza. That's a portion of it. But let's talk about it a little bit more. But any other thoughts about the sort of the war crime definition that we have here? So before we go into this, and I will ask and talk specifically about what you said, let's talk a little bit about Hamas and how Hamas operates, okay? The tunnels in Gaza, I'm sure you've heard about this, but let's talk about what that means. Hamas, with all the money that they've received throughout the years and all the power, because Hamas is a governing body of Gaza, have used all its power and resources to build an underground city of tunnels. These tunnels are huge. And when I say huge, I mean these tunnels are able to hold a person, or in some areas I even heard a car that can drive there. Basically an underground city that basically their sole goal is to be able to smuggle things both from Egypt, both from running underground in multiple places. So the only purpose of these tunnels is terror. So whenever you see a tunnel, there is a terror. Instead of Hamas, instead of using its resource to help the Gazans people, to help support them and build a better Gaza and better lifestyle, they've decided to do this. The other aspect that's very important to note is that Hamas is using civilians as human shields. We talked about the deaths of innocent civilians. From the Hamas perspective, it's a very easy solution. Because for them, if they're using civilians as human shields, on the one hand, if Israel sees innocent civilians, they most likely decide not to attack, which we don't do in most times. Then Hamas won. But even if Israel decides to attack, and then innocent civilians are dead, then it also contributes to Hamas, because then from the PR perspective, they're able to blame Israel for killing civilians. That sort of vicious cycle continues in many ways. I want to show you a few more things in terms of the tunnel, just for you to understand the magnitude. This is some of the photos about the underground city that currently exists in Gaza. So it's a full-on city underneath what you guys are able to see. So all the Hamas terrorists, all of them are being underground. All the people that were kidnapped are all underground, most of them at least. So just for you to understand the magnitude. And I want to show you two videos when we talk about these tunnels and how they come and where are they able to operate as well.
אנחנו נכנסים כרגע למסגד, שבו נמצא מתחת למסגד בקומת מרתף מחסן אמל"ח ומעבדה של רקטות של החמאס ומלא מלא מטענים וחומרי חבלה וחומרי נפץ. אנחנו כרגע נכנסים למסגד, אפשר לראות אותו פה. עכשיו אנחנו נרד למטה לקומת המרתף, אל המעבדה של הרקטות של החמאס. שימו לב, החמאס בנה קירות שלמים שיסתירו את המעבדה. היינו צריכים לפוצץ אותם על מנת לפתוח את המעבדה. יש פה פיר אפשר לראות את הפיר המבצעי שיורד למטה בשביל שהמחבלים יתחבאו. נמשיך למעבדה. פה אפשר לראות על הלוח את הסרטוטים של הרקטות. נמשיך פנימה. אפשר לראות פה את כל סוגי המרגמות והרקטות השונות, מרומים שונים מכל מיני סוגים. חומרי חבלה, פה הם ישבו ותכננו ובנו את כל הרקטות במעבדה הזאת שנמצאת מתחת למסגד.
So that, as you can see, this is happening under a mosque. Let's see another quick video. Underneath Shifa Hospital.
We see the wiring going through it. It's pretty easy to get down. We went into the tunnel. Right now we're going under the Qatari compound. It's very dark. The walls are moist. There are multiple rooms here that we're opening. This appears to be a bathroom. Another room with an AC. The wiring to that AC helped the combat fighters realize that there's a tunnel here. And if we're moving on, walking down that tunnel, now we know that this connects to the network of tunnels that Hamas holds in Gaza. Underneath sensitive spots like hospitals, holding the civilians of Gaza hostage and abusing their right to medical treatment, to human rights, and to any base human right that they have.
So that's under the Shifa Hospital. Let me just put this back. And let me say this. I think, as we hold on, we've seen this. Let me just say one thing before we continue. It's very unfortunate that Hamas is using both the hospitals and the mosque for their purpose, because they know that Israel won't attack because of the definition of war crime, which we'll get into a second, that includes hospitals and mosques. I think, you know what, let's do this first. So just for you to understand, in terms of the definition of a war crime, is basically that it's forbidden to turn recognized civilian hospitals into conflict zones, forbidden to use civilian populations. There is intentionally directing attacks against buildings dedicated to religion, education, art, science, historic monuments, hospitals, and more. There is an exception where this, in terms of definition, when these hospitals and mosques are being targeted and being fired from. Then basically these targets has become legitimate target. As you can see that this is a international law expert that talks exactly about this. So in terms of the actual definition of a war crime, we can see what's actually going on here. But I say it's very unfortunate that Hamas is actually using these facilities and using civilians as human shields. What I also want to say is that it doesn't take away with the sympathy and hurt to see innocent civilians that are impacted by the situation. And it doesn't matter if it's because of Hamas. It doesn't matter sort of what led to it. It still means a lot, and it's still difficult to see and cope with. And I really do hope that a lot of the innocent civilians that live in Gaza will not be affected. The only thing that I think everyone shares is the compassion for the Palestinian people that are being infected by that. I think what we differ than a lot of people from the world is who is in charge. And why is this happening? Is it happening because of Hamas or happening because of Israel? And I think we can see the answer within this. The other part that I want to talk about is the ethnic cleansing. Who in here heard about ethnic cleansing that's being conducted in Gaza? What do you say about that? The population has grown? Okay.
Ethnic cleansing is a method of either by death or forcing people out of an area of making that population smaller.
Making the population smaller? Okay. Okay.
So it cannot be ethnic cleansing.
Okay. What else? Any thoughts about ethnic cleansing? So this is a statement that you hear a lot. I've seen a lot on social media. It's very easy. It's a very catchy phrase. Not a lot of people even understand what that means. So let's talk about it and let's define it a little bit. Based on the UN, Purposeful policy designed by one ethnic or religious group to remove by violent and terror-inspiring means the civilian population of another ethnic or religious group from certain geographic areas. To me, it sounds very similar to what Hamas has done, by the way, on October 7th. So when we actually talk about ethnic cleansing, I think the question is reverse. So Israel is, as you can see, not conducting ethnic cleansing in Gaza. If we would want to, we would do it a long time ago, but we actually don't want to. I do want to focus on what ethnic cleansing is in terms of the Jewish population. So as you can see here, we can see what the density of the population, of the Jewish population in Arabic countries. My grandparents were born in Iraq, in Baghdad, in both sides. They were actually very rich and very wealthy. My family owned a lot of stores. My grandmother tells that they lived in a 5-story building that just they owned. They were very wealthy. But they were forced in 1951 to come to Israel because of the Farhud, the riots that came in Iraq against the Jews and basically forced them to flee to Israel, and they flew to Israel with just one suitcase. So unfortunately, we didn't. This entire wealth didn't accumulate back to my generation. But as you can see, a lot of these Arabic countries, their presence of Jews in 1948 versus what's happening today is pretty significant. From hundreds of thousands of Jewish Arabic population to barely nothing. On the other end, when we looked about Arabs in Israel and we look about Arabs in Gaza, that population is just significantly growing within the years. So the notion and the context of ethnic cleansing is something that needs to be taken into consideration when we think about these things. Okay, let's move to what Israeli feels about what's happening right now. So let's talk about the release of hostages. I'm sure that everyone have heard about what's currently going on. The recent deal, the basic of it was to be able to release about 50 Israelis in exchange for 150 Palestinian prisoners. And I want us to talk a little bit about what a prisoners exchange deal looks like and what is the implication. Is it good? What are some of the implications that a prisoner exchange deal could have? This one or any other? I want to hear what your thoughts. Yes? Something we'll be willing to do in the future. Okay, so you're saying it's a good thing in general? Okay, what else? Good or bad, and if so, why? Shows the value of life. Okay, that's good. You can think about any negative implications? Right. Right. So release existing terrorists back into the field. Okay. What else?
Gives Hamas time to regroup.
Give Hamas time to regroup. Great. Okay. What we could see is that has a lot of impact. We talk about the implications of all these thoughts. I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the more of these implications and a little bit of history about what these prisoners exchange have happened in the past. In the past, before 1985, there were a lot of exchange based on the Yom Kippur War, based on other wars, but mostly with other militaries. So with the Syrian, with the Jordanian, with the Egyptian, always soldiers to soldiers. This, from 1985, approximately, these are the major deals that have happened both with Hamas and Hezbollah. In 1995, we released basically 3 soldiers to more than 1,000 Hamas prisoners, including Ahmad Yassin, the head of Hamas back in the days. Ahmed Yassin actually brought back Hamas together and basically was the moving force that led to the first Intifada in 1987. Then in 2004, we released, as you can see, this person, a colonel in the Israeli military with Hezbollah. They were actually kidnapped because of a drug deal. So we released about 450 Palestinian prisoners, Palestinian and non-Palestinian prisoners, in exchange for him and 3 Israelis' dead bodies. And then in the 2011, the Gilad Shalit deal. Gilad Shalit deal was the biggest deal that we've ever had, in my lifetime. Gilad Shalit was released after 5 years or so in prison in exchange to 1,027 prisoners from Hamas. These prisoners have what we call blood on their hands. These are people that have physically killed other Israelis and murdered them. One of the notorious persons that were released in this deal is this guy. Does this face rings a bell? Yeah. Yeah. Yahya Sinwar is the lead of Hamas and the one who's in charge of October 7th. And because of that, basically all these releases of prisoners basically contribute to the power of these organizations to be able to propel and succeed. Yeah, yeah. So we can see here, I've done a little bit of analysis in terms of the other deals and the ratio. So what the Palestinians released throughout these 3 deals and how many Israelis have been sent. The ratio is getting worse and worse. From about 1 to 400, 1 to 450, to about 1 to 1,000. These are soldiers, okay? And today we're talking about a ratio of about 1 to 3. And that's happening for multiple reasons. One reason is because on these deals from 1985 to about 2011, we've negotiated from a position of weakness. We basically tried to save those people. We didn't have the means. We couldn't do it our own. So our only way to do it was through negotiation. What we're seeing now is something a little bit different. Well, first of all, we're negotiating from a position of power. We got into Gaza. We're able to make progress in Gaza. And we're able to basically provide some sort of lever over Hamas. So that's why this deal is being done differently. In addition to that, the goal of this deal, despite what everyone thinks, is not the prisoners. Hamas' sole goal in general is to release its prisoners from jails. However, this specific deal, the major goal is to create a ceasefire for them to regroup, a ceasefire for them to understand what's going on and assess the situation and then attack again. This is the goal of the situation. So the reason we have the prisoners exchange is because that Israel went into Gaza and basically made the progress that it did. If we were not going into Gaza and we're just sitting and trying to negotiate a deal, you could be rest assured this would not be the ratio that we would be negotiating with. Let's go back to the implication that you guys mentioned. On the one hand, there is a commitment to bring people home, sort of the Israeli ethos of, Israel values life. Anyone can recognize where this photo is from? What's the context of this photo? Entebbe. Great job. So, Operation Entebbe, Mifta Yonatan, basically been done in 1976 or 78, where a plane from Israel to France was hijacked and led to Uganda. And then the Israeli military forces disguised themselves, went into Uganda, and rescued the hostages. 3 people died, 3 hostages, and one person who was the lead of this operation. His name is Yoni Netanyahu, the brother of Benjamin Netanyahu. But this is the Israeli ethos. Everyone comes back home. Israel values life. Will bring you back. On the flip side, what it does is actually boosting Hamas and other terrorist organizations to kidnap more people. Now they know that the only way to release our prisoners is to kidnap other people. So why would we stop? We can see that it works. We can see that Israel is willing to pay. So let's just do it more and more. No one says that they will stop just with Israelis in Israel. Israelis, like myself, even in America, are a moving target as well. So it's not just that it's risky for them, it's risky for all Israelis around the world. And in addition to that, what it actually does, it basically, there is a potential increase in motivation to terrorists to commit those crimes. Because if a terrorist, before they go and they try to commit a crime, basically they think to themselves, worst case, I will be released in this prisoner's exchange, and my name will be glorified, and I will come back home. So that's what these deals are actually making. So there's a lot of implications that are not always positive to these deals. And in the long run, these things will only harm Israel. On the flip side, and that's important to know, if you were to ask me if one of my daughters, brothers, sisters would be held captive, I would not care about any of this. I would do whatever it takes to bring them back, which I can fully understand. So there is no judgment about what's going on and what's happening in Israel. Each person speaks from their own position, and it's valid. But the situation is very tricky and complex. Almost the last slide before the Q&A. Let's talk about the potential outcome of the war. Uh, the only thing that I would say is that no one knows. Let's start with that. That's a big disclaimer. No one knows what's happened. Even what's written here is just an assumption. I can tell you that one of the biggest things is that any scenario is bad. All the future outcomes are bad. There is just one that's less bad than the other, and there are no good outcome. If it was up to Israel, we would not be having any of this. But now is to choose the least worst option. One of the things that had to be restored is the personal security for the people of Israel. Is the sense of security of people around Israel and even people that live around the border have been significantly impacted. Impact to the way that even people in Hulon, in the center of Israel now, is willing to carry arms. That's something that never happened before. So there is a huge impact on the sense of self-security. So whatever solution is going to be in the future, this would need to be addressed. The second part is when we talk about the Hamas leadership change, this is something that's going to be a must-have. We are not sure if this is going to happen through the PLO or through other organization. Something will have to change in order for Israel to say we're going to stop, we're satisfied with our progress. The other part that's very important, let's talk about the international forces. Some nations also come up with the suggestion of potentially putting in international forces on the ground. I would say that if you were living in one of the kibbutzim around the Gaza Strip, let's just say that you would not be able to sleep very well at night knowing that soldiers from Fiji is watching you, right? Because you wouldn't trust them, right? So it's like the sense of security here is very important. Sending international troops is nice, but it's probably not going to be the best case scenario. And lastly, there are two, in our neighborhood, as we say, the Middle East, there are a lot of people watching. One of the major organizations that's sitting there behind the fence and watching is Hezbollah. Hamas is like the little brother of Hezbollah. Hezbollah is 10x, if not more, stronger than Hamas in many ways. There are about 8,000 Radwan forces, which are basically infantry troops that sit around the border just waiting to be called to go into Israel and do the same thing all over again. And however Israel responds to what Hamas has done right now, this would be impacting the other borders of the north. I think the other part is that Israel also realized that the conception of letting these guerrilla organizations sort of prosper and grow within their own area, whether it's Hamas or whether it's Hezbollah, it's something that we cannot afford. We had this conception, false conception, that if we just let them be, if the dog barks but don't bite, just don't do anything with it until it bits you, and then that bit is pretty significant. So that conception about how we handle war, how we handle our territory in the Middle East will have to change as well. So let's go to Q&A. So we put here some questions about some tough questions, some less tough questions. Feel free to ask whatever you want. Any question is valid, and we'll take it from there.
Rabbi.
Thanks so much for being here.
Of course.
It's great to see you again. I've never talked to a commander of a search and rescue unit before, so I wanted to ask you, putting on that hat as an IDF person, you remember when you were 18 and your brigade, there's all this unity, you're ready to fight until your brother or sister beside you gets killed. 68 IDF soldiers, I believe, have been killed in Gaza. 3 in the north, or more than that. I thought of you when I saw 3 dogs have apparently been killed. I know this sounds weird, but like the search and command of sending dogs into the tunnel. Do you have any more information about that loss that we don't read about in the news or in our news feed? Friends back home. I mean, we all have relatives, of course, who know someone who's been kidnapped or murdered, but the IDF itself, while I know the morale is high, is it true that about 70 IDF soldiers have already been killed?
Yeah, so a good question, Rabbi. I think that the numbers of the soldiers who died in Gaza are vague on purpose. They don't release them as often. Every once in a while you hear about incidents that had happened in Gaza in the past. There is some censorship in terms of releasing certain names of who died and when. But there are definitely soldiers who died in Gaza, and unfortunately, most likely there will be more soldiers who are going to die in Gaza. That's a part of the war effort. And I think we're going to see more of that. Potentially, also, there are a lot of there's some people who were kidnapped that also potentially died because of the Israeli attacks. It's a part of what war is ugly. War is not easy. And I think within that, the Israeli society knows that we'll have to take a lot of losses in relate to that. I think, as you said, the morale is high, not just within the military, but also back home. So the reason that the morale is high within the military is because of the strong backbone by the Israelis at home that supports them and just go and do your thing. We'll be here. We'll wait for you. So the morale is high. There is some vagueness on purpose about what's going on in Gaza. But I would assume that there have been people who died, even Israelis who were kidnapped by the bombing of the Israeli forces as a result of that. One example that I remember, the person didn't die, but a crazy story, I'm not sure if you've heard, an Israeli-Russian guy that was released actually a few days ago. His story is amazing. He was at the music festival. He was in charge of the sound, if I'm not mistaken. He was kidnapped to Gaza. He was held in a building that was bombed by Israel. He managed to escape. He was the only one that managed to escape in that building. And he wandered in Gaza by himself for about 4 days, trying to reach the border. But then was captured by Gazans in the street and just been taken back to Hamas. So just another crazy story within this crazy situation.
Hi. Yes, it is.
Yeah, we can hear you. We can hear you.
I know one of the arguments that I've heard a lot of people talk about is colonization and overusing that word. But you talked about IDF training on how to pull people out of their homes. Is that colonization? And I don't know much about that part of it, about Israel taking Palestinians out of their homes.
Yeah, just to be clear, the reference of training of taking people out of their home was in the context of taking people out of their Jewish homes. This was in 2005. We were trained of how to carry people from their home in the Gaza Strip, Israelis that live in their home, and take them out. It's not a method that's been used on Palestinians.
Tomer, can you say more about who was taken from their homes in 2005, why the Israeli military and Israeli government decided to take Israeli citizens out of their homes that had been living in Gaza and move them forcibly, move Israeli Jewish citizens forcibly out of Gaza back into Israel?
Yeah, so let's go back to the map that we showed. Let's go back to this map because I think it's important to show. In Gaza, in 2005, I remember every other week, just for you to understand, this is to refresh, the dark side is Gaza, owned by Palestinians, and the bright side is the ones that controlled by Israel. The number of soldiers that we heard died in the Gaza Strip as a result of that, literally any other week you would hear a bunch of soldiers die. 3 here, 3 there, it was just too much. And just for you to understand that in order to maintain security for this little dot, there is a military force that needs to guard this and suffers losses as a result. These towns were actually built back in the days to maintain the security level within the Gaza Strip back in the past. So this maintained until 2005. And I think in 2005, basically the government said, led by Ariel Sharon, enough is enough, and we've decided to pull out of these people. And that's where Jewish soldiers took Jewish people from their home.
Tomer, the second part of Laura's question was, what about this accusation of colonialism? Is Israel a colonialist country?
Yeah. From the perspective of Israel, it depends how do you define colonialism. Like when you say colonialism, can you talk a little bit about how would you define it?
I mean, sorry. The biggest comparison a lot of people made was how the Native Americans, right, came over, you took their land. The understanding that some very pro-Palestinian folks have been declaring is that we have gone in and taken this land. And I know that goes back way to the other history of it and everything, but I thought, and I could be wrong, that a year or two ago or a couple years ago that there was a situation where Palestinians were taken out of their homes.
Yeah.
Sorry, it was last January or December that I believe in the north that they had pulled a bunch of Arabs out of their homes and basically told them that you can't be here anymore. And then they had Jewish families move into those
Is
same
that
homes.
in Israeli territories in the West Bank? Where is that exactly?
I believe it was in Israel. I could have to.
Oh, Sheikh Jarrah. Okay. I see. Okay, let me answer this a little bit and then talk about the colonialism part, because I think this was the bigger question. Sheikh Jarrah is in East Jerusalem, mostly predominantly focused by Muslim families. A lot of Arabs live there. There's been a lot of negotiation within Jewish families that basically revealing some of the land, that some of it was purchased by Jews in the past. So that's why all of these disagreements went and led by court, and then the court made the decision. This is within Israeli territories. No Arab family was suddenly, taken and said, okay, this is not your land anymore, just leave. There is a very thorough judicial process they had to go through for something like that to happen. With the Sheikh Jarrah specific example, they mentioned that they purchased the land back in the days, and then they have to provide proof of it. But it's all from like a legal matter. There's nothing that is in terms of a policy of Israel to get people out of their homes. About the colonialism part, let's talk. I want to show a little bit about the history piece. Hold on. Here we go. So this is a map, shows basically 4 snapshots of Israel throughout history, okay? Starting from 1947, where you can see sort of the Arab land in green. Let's go from left to right. So you can see the Arab land in green, and then you can see the privately held owned Jewish land in blue. And then the rest is publicly state-owned land, when there was the British mandate in Israel. So as you can see, the land was not owned by anyone. The British owned and was a part of that land. And then in 1947, based on the UN declaration, then there was the split of 2 countries, right? About Israel and Palestine. So the red supports, basically demonstrate the Palestinian state, and the white presents the Jewish state. This has been divided by the UN, and this has been declared by the UN and agreed by everyone back in the days. Then, 2 minutes after that decision has been made, the Arab wars, the Arab militaries from all across the world attacked Israel as a result of that. And what happened is this, after that war, what you could see is basically Israel was able to capture some of the territories and then be a part of it. And then after the Oslo Accords, basically then the split was between the Israel state and then the Arab territories. As you can see, Gaza is a part of the Arab territories that was administered by the Palestinians. But this is the split. So when we think about colonialism, it's not that the Palestinians owned the land and then basically we came in and we took them from there. Saying that when that happened, when the UN declaration happened, and when the war happened, there were Palestinians that were displaced as a result of that and as a result of that war. But it's not a policy about taking Palestinians, removing them back. If this was the situation, why do we even have Arab Israelis? If this is the situation, why don't we take the Arabs that are currently 20% of the civilians in Israel and just remove them and say Israel is colonizer. We're just going to take the entire north of Israel, a lot of areas in the south. So in terms of the colonialism part, it doesn't make sense based on history and what we see today. Yeah.
Jay, can you turn on my mic? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. I just wanted to add one element because you bring up, Laura, Native Americans, right? People who are indigenous to their land. I don't know how, when you think about the land of Israel, how you could say that the Jews are not indigenous to the land of Israel. There's not just in our Torah, not just in our Bible, do we have records of Jewish people going back 3,000 years. There's archaeological evidence, there's other historical evidence that the Jews have many, many thousands of year old presence in this land, and also a continuous presence. Jews have continuously lived in that land for thousands of years. That's not to say that this isn't the Palestinians' home. The Palestinians and their ancestors have also lived there for a very long time. But to say that the Jews are colonialists and displacing an indigenous people is just, on its face, absurd. Yes?
The problem is the tunnels. Can I be heard here? The problem is the tunnels. You got to get rid of the tunnels. If you don't get rid of the tunnels, you can't get rid of Hamas. Nobody is talking about the tunnels, or are they?
Yeah, good question. The question is, how do you get rid of these tunnels? It's very, very challenging. You can't, the challenge with those tunnels is that you can try to bomb them from the air, but again, it's very, very challenging. Some of them are a few levels deep. They have concrete doors. This is not like sort of very amateur, a little bit of sand here and there. It's a whole underground city that's being in Gaza, that people live there for a long time. So that's the biggest challenge we see.
I suspect we got them, the bombs.
Yeah, you have certain bombs, but you can't, it's not that you're going to throw bombs all over Gaza and then the entire tunnel system will be displaced. That's not true. It's a much more complex period. But yeah, let's, can I go, Sal?
Okay, so I've heard people compare this to our 9/11, which I think is a false comparison because, number one, they came, they destroyed, then they left. So we were not experiencing an existential threat next door. And I think that maybe, and I would like you to speak to this, that the reason that the Israeli morale is so high is because this existential threat is next door. And I suspect if we had an existential threat on the border of Canada or Mexico, that we would be behaving accordingly.
Yeah. It's a very interesting comparison. Think, but what if 9/11 would happen by Mexico or Canada? What would the U.S. do? Would they be okay? Okay, let's let them have their land. We'll negotiate. We'll try to see what. No, within what happened after 9/11, just a tiny example to what America would do, rightfully so. If that would happen. If Cuba would shoot missiles over Manhattan, what would happen? Cuba would be destroyed tomorrow. It's just this is the comparison we're talking about.
Other questions? You're next, Brian.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to the colonialist point of view here. Israel's losing this war. I'm not talking the physical war, but the war around the world from a political standpoint. How do we fix this? My first question is, who are the Palestinians? I mean, that sounds like a dumb question, but they're being branded as the people who should own that land.
Yeah.
How do you address this?
It's a good question. So you have two questions there. Let's refer to the latter one first. The Palestinians haven't defined themselves as a nation, when they were under, let's say, the Jordanian regime, or when they were under the Egyptian regime. The sense of becoming a Palestinian and being Palestinian have come up with the years as Israel started to get involved. So that's on the Palestinian question. About the PR side, we're definitely losing.
Can I get back to that? So you're saying that Palestinians are Jordanians?
There were Jordanians, there were Egyptians before, there were people that lived in Israel before.
So you're saying they're migrants there?
They were definitely migrants.
I'm not arguing the point.
Yeah.
The point is that point is not being made public to the rest of the world.
Yeah, because I think that even then, this is not the most important part. It's not that if you were to explain to someone, let's say you also spoke about the advocacy part and the media aspect, right? It's not that you would explain to, how the Palestinian people even came about, that it would matter right here, right now. The question I think that matters right now is, what do we do with this situation? And how do we solve what's happening right now? Palestinians are not going to go anywhere. You have Palestinians in Gaza, despite the fact that we'll go and define how they came about and how they evolved and what their origin is from. Right now we have Palestinians in the West Bank, we have Palestinians in Gaza, there's Israel here, and we need to solve it. This is the focus. But we're trying to be a little bit more practical than going back and try to assess how things have happened, how we got here. Because what you're talking about, the advocacy part and the Israel is losing the PR side, and I absolutely agree. The challenge comes from what's happening today, a lot of this. And focusing on, okay, let's recognize we have Palestinians in Gaza, we have Palestinians in the West Bank, Israel is there, no one's going away to anywhere. How do we resolve this? This should be the focus of what's happening. How to solve it? Well, first of all, it's a very light question, not complex at all. I think the short answer is no. The longer answer is that it's complex, and I think that the silver lining potentially around October 7th, if something good might come out of it, is that it might expedite some sort of the solution to this problem that existed for many years. Hamas even, we're here talking about what's happening in Gaza, but there have been multiple sort of what we call rounds in Hebrew of military attacks every other year. It's not that it's a problem that goes away. It's like, I gave an example, I think, yesterday, where it's like your knee hurts, but you keep walking, but it still hurts. But you get to the point where you can't walk anymore, and then you say, okay, I got to do a knee replacement. So hopefully after that surgery, things will be better. But whatever's happening now is complicated. And what you ask is that if I have a solution, not necessarily, but I really hope that October 7 will be the catalyzer to doing something more meaningful in that stage.
Brian, you want to?
So what if I said it's always going to be complicated?
The what?
What if it's always going to be complicated?
It is complicated, and
I
it
mean,
will
always.
continue to be complicated.
Always.
Yeah, the question is
More
how
than
you
just
take that complexity and you undo it. And I think that in order to do that, you have to have brave leaders from both sides and willing to make sacrifices and make sure that things happen and go to some extent against some of their people's wills. Because if it's up to the Palestinians, they might not ever have a country, a state of their own, if they continue to fight on things that don't promote, what they can accomplish. And the same from the Israeli side. Also, there is a lot of criticism there. I think that there are Israelis that don't necessarily understand, and in order for you to get to a certain level of, one call it an agreement or maybe even peace, but some sort of equilibrium where you can live peacefully in the neighborhood, that you have to give you have to do some sacrifices. And I think that when you come and you try to meet in the middle and you have two brave leaders, as we've seen in the past with Egypt and with other Arab countries, that's where, maybe there is hope.
Tomer, I'd like to just add one note and see your thoughts on this to your question, Louis, which is that if we look at this map, in 1947, the UN suggested or adopted this partition plan, giving the Jews a state, and the Arabs, there was no Palestine at the time, there was a British mandate, but no Palestinian country, would have created Palestine. This partition would have created a Jewish state, Israel, and a Palestinian state called Palestine. But while the Israeli leaders accepted it, or the Jewish leaders at the time accepted it, the Palestinian leaders did not. And we know there's been rounds not only of war, but also of peace negotiations. Most recently, well, we talked about Oslo. This happened again in the Camp David summit in the early 2000s, happened again as recently as 2009 and 2015. And one of the problems, one of the reasons why there is no solution yet is because the Palestinian leaders, Hamas, they don't want to live side by side with Israel, with their own state. They want to destroy Israel and have the entire land to themselves. And so I would contend that until the Palestinians have leaders who are willing to say, we accept Israel's right to exist and we're willing to live side by side with it, there won't be peace. I think you're really right. So it's so important you bring up Egypt as an example, because Egypt was Israel's biggest enemy for its entire history until 1978, 79. And they had one very brave leader, Anwar Sadat, right? Sadat, who he thought this could be very unpopular in his country. He ended up being assassinated a few years later. But he said Egypt is better off if they make peace with Israel, and Israel has a right to exist. And you know what? It's Israel's longest standing Arab ally. Maybe ally is a strong word. It's Israel's longest standing peace relationship with their neighbor. And if the Palestinians have a leader who is not like Hamas, but is more like Sadat, perhaps they would have peace. What do you say to that, Tomer?
Yeah, and I agree with you, Jeff. I would say another complexity, just to add here, is that even if you bring a leader that is potentially willing to negotiate with Israel and do some sacrifices, it's not necessarily that that leader is being recognized by the Palestinian people. You know, even Mahmoud Abbas right now, the leader of the Palestinians, doesn't have sort of the popularity of a leader. Some people say that it is the reason that there hasn't been elections for so many years within within Palestine is because they're afraid that Hamas will come to power. So it's not even just about finding that leader that will be able to make sacrifices. Finding the leader that has the vote of the people and the people are standing behind them, that is willing to make this sacrifice. So just add another layer of complexity.
So I want to take a question from Brian in 1 second, but I want to make this a little bit more complex because we're talking about Israel and the Palestinians. Let's add a little complexity. It's not as if today everyone on the Israeli side is just waving a happy face flag saying, let's sing Kumbaya and make peace. There are many people, ministers in the government, who actually don't ever want to live side by side with the Palestinian state, who want to forestall the possibility of ever having a Palestinian state. So, Tomer, can you talk a little bit about those forces in Israeli society and how Israeli society itself has kind of evolved from the last time when in Camp David, when there was a big consensus about making peace, to where you are today?
Yeah. We'll probably have to spend 2 full days just to talk about the Israeli politics. But in general, just for you, if you think that the American political system has been crazy over the last couple of years, I think we one-up you in the last couple of years. We have 5 elections in a very short amount of time and complete political chaos. The end of it, without going too much into it, there are 2 things that are important to remember. Benjamin Netanyahu has been the long-lasting Prime Minister of Israel, more than David Ben-Gurion. And then the second thing is that the current government is probably the rightest wing that Israel have ever had. And as a result of that, some of the ministers within this government have very extreme opinions. One of them even mentioned about one of the ministers in the government mentioned to throw a nuclear bomb over Gaza. The other one mentioned that we should burn Khawara, one of the Arab villages. The other one mentioned that we should start implementing death penalty for terrorists. But with all this extremism and despite the fact that these people are part of the government, we should judge the Israeli government by its actions. So Bibi, with everything, and he's been the long-standing prime minister, while he's been, collaborating with the more extremists, his actions are pretty center. None of this have happened, and within what's happening within the war, there is a major cautious about the things and how we move on. Both the military and the police are very professional in what they do, and they know how to mitigate some of these potentially extreme views that some of these ministers are viewing. So to that point, Jeff, just I would say judge the Israeli government by its action, not but what you hear from the extremists here and there.
Thank you. Bryna.
I think you've discussed a lot of what I was thinking about, but I thought the Palestinians elected Hamas as their leaders. So how many of the Palestinians are really Hamas?
Yeah, so it's a good question. Actually, by a recent poll, you would see that there's actually a wide support of what happened on October 7th, both on the West Bank and both from Gaza. So the Palestinian people actually have support of what Hamas is doing within what happened in October 7th in both territories. It's a very interesting survey that was done after October 7th.
By the same token,
Yeah.
you talk about leadership. It's no secret that Netanyahu is very unpopular among many Israelis. What do you see as the possibility that Netanyahu and his government will be voted out of office as soon as there's something, a ceasefire?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say a few thoughts here. Benjamin Netanyahu, there is a reason why it's been the long-lasting prime minister of Israel. He's a political genius, and people said that he will be eliminated probably more than a handful of times. He was always back. He was always able to keep leading the Likud party. I think that what's happening now is probably it's going to be something very different. We've never seen anything as extreme as this one, and I believe from what it sounds from multiple ways that there's going to be a significant challenge to continue being a prime minister and holding this sort of coalition after what happened. I think what we have seen in the last couple of years is Benjamin Netanyahu may be a part of the strategy, and you can see this. You can see that the ministers that are being put in place are not necessarily the most qualified people for their jobs. And whether it's a strategy, whether it's this is how he functions, but what we see now is it's all collapsed when the ministers had to operate in support of what's happening. So all this to say, I think it's going to be very challenging to maintain this, and the government will probably not going to last as long as it would hope. The challenge is to define when that war ends. Because we always say, after the war. The war could last, how do you define the war? Do you define the war even the year after? Do you define the war where you have to deal with Hezbollah in the north? How do you define it? When is the actual ending? When you return all the people that were kidnapped? So that's where it starts to get complicated.
We have time for maybe two more questions. Faith?
Two more.
Thanks. So one of the things that I know, I'm sure that some of us at least have been hearing, is that there was intelligence information that there was possibly this terrorist attack that was going to happen, and that either the government or the military knew of these practice towns that they were carrying out practice attacks on the last few years, and that female forces that were watching the border reported multiple times that they thought something was happening and were ignored and essentially written off as fake news. Do you know anything about that? And how should that make Israeli citizens feel about their safety under the current administration?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you. I think that there are two things to say about what you said. One is the conception. The conception within the Israeli intelligence and within the Israeli government was the fact that Hamas and Hezbollah doesn't have the motivation, that Hamas and Hezbollah are deterred and don't have the motivation to go and do something big. And a part of this false conceptions came from the fact that also Israel is trying to be able to provide as much sort of, let's call it hope for this region. So for example, I think about 20,000 Palestinian workers came from Gaza to work in Israel on a daily basis and came back. So the goal was let's give them some resources, let's give them some financial hope. And as a result of that, because they are deterred and because they have hope, nothing will happen. So that's a conception that were completely false. Then the second thing is, as you mentioned about the witness, about the people that have seen, or the intelligence officer that mentioned that something might happen. I would say, first of all, this will definitely need to be investigated and will be happening thoroughly. But I think it's hard to do it in isolation. in hindsight, it's very easy to say, hey, there are some people who said that this is going to happen. The big question that we have to ask, how often does it happen? How often did people say that things will happen and they didn't? It's a big thing. Like you keep hearing where, potentially there were like intelligence that Hezbollah is going to attack from the north, but they didn't. There's going to be, intelligence that Iran will do something, but they didn't. Not that I know anything, but I'm saying that judging it in isolation and in hindsight is very easy, but being in the military as an intelligence officer, which I wasn't, but keep hearing these assessments and try to better understand what's going on and making decision is not easy. So definitely this will need to be investigated, but I'm saying it's a little bit more complex that we see in the news.
Thank you. We have time for there's a few more questions. We said we'd go till 8:30, so let's see how many we get to. I don't believe you've asked a question yet.
As someone who served in the West Bank, what do you think of an organization like Breaking the Silence, which is soldiers who served in the West Bank and claim that Israel is enforcing a brutal military occupation on the Palestinians there? What's your opinion on that organization?
So Breaking the Silence is a what we call the very left-wing organization that talks about sort of certain witnesses from soldiers that have served in the West Bank. I would say a few things. First of all, from what I've heard and some of the witnesses that I've heard from soldiers, I would say that every soldier is right to say whatever they want, as long as it's true, and as long as you provide context. I'm afraid that in a lot of these cases, some of the soldiers that speak on these their testimonies being recorded don't provide a full picture. Don't provide exactly what's happened. Don't provide the context of why things are happening. Don't provide the context of why they were forced to do certain things. And I think when you tell a certain portion of the story, you don't see the big picture. So that's one. Second thing is also to say, sometimes, and things are not perfect, and some soldiers that I've also seen in my own eyes are doing things that are unethical. But then the military knows how to deal with them. They take them, this is not something that's been encouraged, and they try to remove them as much as possible. There was one example that was a little bit more popular, was a soldier called Elor Azaria. Have you heard about him? It was a few years ago. It was one of the terrorists in the West Bank that tried to assassinate a soldier. He was caught and he was injured. He fell on the floor, and he was controlled. Then Elor Azaria decided, he was standing, let's say, from here where the door is by the videos, and you can access, just Google Elor Azaria soldier in the West Bank, and he decided to shoot him. He literally put his gun and shot him. And the arguments from the right-wing people was, hey, he was a terrorist, this was rightful wing, this was a rightful act, but every other sort of, let's say, more central or Israelis with their mind on their head realized that this is wrong. And then he went to jail. After a long trial that also divided the country, but he went to jail. And I think that's where the military draws the line and say, we don't do any of these things. So to your points, to summarize two things. One, some of these testimonies are out of context. And the second thing, there are some outliers that are happening within the West Bank, but this is not the majority.
I want to add another layer. Can y'all hear me? Is my mic?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I'll use this one. I want to add a little bit of complexity to this, which is to ask, you served in the West Bank. There is a military, a whole branch of the military that is essentially runs the administration of the West Bank called COGAT, basically the Israeli military that grants building permits in the West Bank and Area C of the West Bank. There are Israeli or more often than not, doesn't grant building permits, so it makes it very, very hard to live as a civilian, a Palestinian civilian in this part of the West Bank. And there are Israeli military raids or Israeli military patrols or bases all throughout the West Bank. There's no question. I know occupation is a charged word, but by a reasonable definition, Israel is, at least in some ways, occupying the West Bank. Now, Israel unilaterally withdrew from Gaza, but still occupies the West Bank. There's a very important reason that even on the left, even in the center, and definitely on the right of Israeli politics, even though there are some people on the far left fringe who want to end the occupation of the West Bank today, the vast, vast majority of the Israeli public is not willing to end the occupation. It's not because they're settler colonialists. It's not because they want to make life miserable for Palestinians. It's because, as you said, Abu Mazen, the head of the PA, the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, is in the 18th year of a 4-year term. The reason why he won't hold elections is because all the polls say if he did, Hamas would win. And so if you look at where Gaza is, on just the little bottom left southwest corner, like look in the green right map on the far right, it is very far away from the population centers, from Ben Gurion Airport. If you look at the West Bank, it is literally a few kilometers from it's next door to Tel Aviv, to Jerusalem. It's a few kilometers from Tel Aviv, from the airport. Yep. So if Hamas, the reason why the occupation cannot end tomorrow or today is because if Hamas took over, imagine the damage that they could do. They could shut down the entire country. And I'm not sure, actually. I kind of broke my rule. There wasn't a question in there.
That's okay.
That was just a rant.
I agree with
but
your statement.
What do you think, Tomer?
I agree with your statement. It's pure and simple. Think what would happen if Gaza was in the West Bank. Let's say we end the occupation tomorrow, or there were no Israeli forces within the West Bank. What would happen? Forget about the settlements. Let's say there are no settlements. What would happen? Do you think Israel will allow the Palestinians to go and create these terror nests there? They're just waiting to burst one day? Is that something they will be able to live with? Would you be okay if, and would New York be okay if Staten Island suddenly become an area where terrorists live in, but they're contained? No, right? So how can we be able to be guaranteed their security? That is the biggest question. One of the things we did in Gaza, we left, and this is what happened. So how could anyone guarantee that this would not happen there?
Thank you. So we have time for one last question. Sally, go ahead.
I have a question about refugee status that I read in Noah Tishby's book, and that the UN granted Palestinians refugee status from generation to generation to generation. It's the only group of people in history that's ever been granted status, refugee status, beyond the people who actually had to leave. And that creates a big population issue, and I just wondered if you would speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, by that definition, I should be a refugee too, no? So I think it creates a complexity within what's currently happening. And just to talk maybe, when we say refugee, I think the Palestinian people in general, Jews after the Holocaust have been able to take this, significant event that happened to us and build something off of it. We build a nation, we build a life. I think the Palestinians have always, treated themselves as the victim. And that mindset of the refugee, that mindset of the victim still continues. What if, let's talk what if the Palestinians would invest all their efforts and focus and energy in building a good life for their own? Gaza could have been the most prosperous area in this place. There were no shortage of money. There were no shortage of people willing to invest in this area. But this mentality of being a victim, being the refugee for a generation, that's what really holds them back. Same for the West Bank and same for Gaza. Now, not to say there are no complexities, not to say that it's not easy, have soldiers walking around your neighborhood, with all the compassion for the Palestinian people, there definitely is. But this mentality of we're constantly the victim would lead you nowhere. So it might time to maybe shift gears and focus more on what they could do for themselves, because I think that there is a huge potential there.
I think that UN rule includes people who consider themselves grandchildren of Palestinian refugees living in America or in Germany or wherever they are.
Yeah.
So that's an issue.
Yeah.
Nobody else
Yeah. And as a result of that, I could be a refugee too, you know. All right. Thank you. Before we finish, maybe just something to wrap up. How you could do to help. I think the biggest thing is really to educate yourself from diverse factual sources. What does that mean? It means that don't necessarily just focus on specific things that one media outlet that you're reading. Try to diverse it. Try to read news outlets from Israel. Try to use multiple news outlets from here in America. So try to do it as much as you can to challenge your opinion. Reach out to your elected representative to talk and demonstrate support about Israel. Speak up when you hear misinformation. That happens, unfortunately, too often. Ensure your alma maters go against anti-Semitism. This is what we did at Penn. And, you know, try to do it with schools as well. I just shared with Rachel today about what happened at Tufts. This is our way of acting, and obviously donate, but only for specific cause. Not, I would recommend donating to individual for big organization that could really move the needle. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. I'm going to be here if you have any questions. And Am Yisrael Chai.
Thank you so much, and welcome back. What a warm welcome back for Tomer. Thank you all for being here tonight. Erev Tov.
There's some pins of Israel, the Israeli flag here if anyone wants.
One for me, one for Jeff.
Of course. Here you go.
I'd love one.
Of course. Here you go.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Of course. Of course. Here you go.
Very good
Of
job.
course.
Very
Thank
good
you.
job.
Thank you. Thank you. Here you go. Thank you. Of course. Thank you. Thanks for